YouTube, this is Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to replace your front brake pads on a 2015 Honda Odyssey. Now the first thing I like to do is grab a screwdriver and put it in through these two openings and just kind of alternate pulling that towards you, which will pry up against the pad and the caliper, pushing those caliper pistons back inside the caliper, making room for the new pad material, which will be thicker than these older brake pads. Now before I do that, I like to take a look underneath the hood and verify that our brake master cylinder has enough room in there for the old fluid to be pushed back up through. Now if your brake fluid is getting very old, you can pull this little rubber cap off of the bleeder screw and crack that open as you push these, which will push the old fluid out rather than backwards through the system. You can double check your manufacturer's recommendations on the frequency to change your brake fluid, but you can also just take a look. If it's really dark or looking dirty, it might be a good idea to do that. In this case, we're just going to push the fluid backwards up into the master cylinder. But let's go take a look and see if we've got enough room to do that. Okay, so here's our master cylinder, and you can see that our fluid level is just down below this seam, which is right near the minimum level. And so when we push the caliper piston back in, it's going to there's going to be enough room here for that old fluid to come back up into the system. Now sometimes if this is really dirty, you need to pull the lid off to take a look. Sometimes people ask me if you need to take the lid off in order to push the caliper pistons back in, and you don't, because this air in here that compresses will still be able to escape out the lid even though it's closed. It's somewhat vented, but it's a sealed system, but it allows air to escape. Brake fluid is hydroscopic, or meaning it absorbs moisture, even the moisture in the air, and so or water. So that water will make the brake fluid go bad or degrade quicker. I think it's a good idea just to leave this on and not allow that to be exposed to any more new air or moisture in the air. So you can see we've got plenty of room in there to be able to push that caliper piston back in without worrying about this overflowing. If someone had been topping this off as the brake pads wear down, then this would be too full and we'd have to remove some of that old fluid with a turkey baster or with maybe just a rolled up little paper towel to put it in there and wick some of that old fluid out. Okay, since we know we've got room in the master cylinder, we can push the caliper pistons back in, and a flathead screwdriver or a flat blade screwdriver or a small pry bar will work just fine. And really what you're trying to do is get the tip of this screwdriver to wedge in front of the brake pad here, or you can also have it just catch the edge of the rotor. That would be fine. And just kind of alternate between the two here and pull that steadily towards you. Now on some vehicles this doesn't push those caliper pistons in far enough and you still need to compress them. On this one I think it will work, and we won't need to use a caliper compression tool, but you can also just pull this off and compress the caliper pistons afterwards. That's fine too. Alright, the next thing we need to do is loosen and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts. They're 14mm, and I'm just going to zip these off with this little 3/8 impact, but you can use a wrench or any wrench or socket. And that's what those guys look like. And then if you've got some zip ties or some of these are caliper hanger hooks. They're pretty handy. I finally picked up a pair. But it's nice so that when you take off the caliper, you're not going to let it hang by the brake line there. So we'll just hook this on the caliper and then just let that sit. Hang it up on that's hanging up on the coil spring above. Alright, and then we can take off the old brake pads, but first I'm just going to take out these springs. It's like a little V spring in the top and the bottom that, there it is, that goes into these little holes or edges of the brake pad, and what that does, you can see these just push outward and they prevent the pads from dragging on the rotors. And as you can see, this one is really worn down. That's about as thin as you can get without damaging or scratching on the rotor. And here's our inside pad, and you can see this has got the little metal squealer or noisemaker, and not quite there, but that's again about as thin as you can get without scratching on that. I mean, looks like it's just right there, but this still looks like it's covered in dust and rust, so it probably wasn't quite scratching yet. Now this kit does not come with these replacement clips. A lot of kits will come with them nowadays, so it's a good idea to clean them up if you're gonna have to reuse these. And I'm just gonna brush these with a wire brush and just try to get some of the debris out of there. could also pull these off and put them back on, but we're just going to do a quick little brush here and just make sure that that surface right there is clean. I know in really rusty areas, there's rust buildup between these clips and the actual caliper bracket. In this case, we're in Southern California. We don't really have too much rust, and you can tell that they're looking fine. The idea is that the brake pad not only sits flush in there, but that it can move back and forth without binding there. Now, if you're wondering also on the rotors, it's a good idea to either have those machined or replace the rotors every so often. In this case, they don't look terrible, and the owner in this case just wanted to do the pads if we could, and so that's what we're going to do. We also want to pull out these slide pins and wipe off all the old grease on there. Just try to get them all cleaned up, and sometimes I'll put them in. Sometimes I'll put them back in a couple times to try to get some more of that old dirty grease out of there. And then this is the grease I'm using. This is Silglide. It's made by AGS, labeled here for Napa. But it doesn't take too much. Just a little dab or so, and then I'm going to use a clean part of my glove here to kind of smush that around and spread that around evenly. That looks good. And then just put it right back in. And then you kind of have to squeeze the boot to burp out that air when you do that. And we'll pull out the top one here. Get that all clean. Again, I'm just going to put it in again here just to try to get some more of that old grease out of there. Same thing, just spread that grease around. You don't want to use too much because then these slide pins can get stuck, or they'll be the grease is not compressible. So if you put in too much, it'll make the slide pin want to push out constantly, and that'll drag the pads on your rotor. So just enough, and then just kind of make sure that they spin freely. Nothing's bound up in there. That looks good. All right, and then on the new pads here, I also like to put some Silglide on the back of the shim here, and just kind of spread that around, and then a little bit at each end where it rides inside here. Sometimes I'll also put a little bit of grease on that. Just be careful not to get any grease or anything on the rotor or on the surface of the pad material. And that's ready to go back in, like so. Same with this outside pad. Just a thin layer of this grease. What this grease ends up doing is not only helps it move freely as it needs to, but it also seems to dampen some of the vibration that causes squeaks and squeals and noise. Just seems to run a little bit quieter. Now, our new kit also does not come with these V springs, so these need to be reused. And you'll see these little holes in the ends of the pads. You just line them up and put them in there. When you put these springs on, you may need to keep one hand squeezing those pads together so that when you put these on, they don't pop out and fall on the ground. Sometimes you can see just like that. They're doing their job. That's what they're supposed to do, is push them outward. So I just kind of wanted to show you that's what happens if you do it without holding it. Okay, with your other hand, you just need to grab the caliper. Okay, just kind of got to do this with one hand. Unhook the caliper from that hanger there, and then just carefully position that over the new pads. Hopefully we got it pushed in enough. Just be careful here. Make sure that you don't snag that caliper piston boot. And here we're pretty tight. We just kind of barely made it over there. So now we can put in the caliper slide pin bolts and just get those started by hand. Get this bottom one started there too. Now I'm just going to get these snug here with this. Now you can see that slide pin just wants to spin. Now the torque spec on these that I found is 37 foot-pounds, and you may need to use a 19 millimeter open end wrench on here to hold that steady while we get these torqued. A lot of times, because these have got new clean grease in there, they'll spin. They don't allow you to tighten that. So you need to hold them steady with a 19 millimeter. That's the torque wrench I'm using, the gear wrench 85062. I've been real happy with this. You've probably seen that in some of my other videos, but I'll get a link to that in the description along with some of the other parts and tools for you. Now that's pretty much everything. Just make sure that before you drive off to step on the brake pedal a few times. What you want to do is just press it about halfway down until it's firm or feels firm, and that's pushing the caliper pistons back out, pressing these pads up against the rotor where they need to be. When you do that, it's important to not press your brake pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Once you've done that, go ahead and top off your master cylinder with brake fluid at the appropriate level as well, and double check the torque specs with your manufacturer's recommendations. 37 foot-pounds is just what I found online. Hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.